Hi guys, my name is Vila and I've been interviewing my dad about his 1997 Everest climb. And I created this series called My Dad Climbed Everest and I Have Questions. And as a kind of offshoot of that series, we have been talking about the Everest Base Camp trek, which I did with him in 2022, and he has done over 10 times since the 1990s, pretty much. So we're answering all your questions about the Everest Base Camp hike. So today we're answering the questions how the Everest Base Camp trek compares to the 1990s when he originally did it, his top gear recommendations, what guide company to use, and how to find a reputable one. What are the first signs of altitude sickness, which is something very important to know, along with the number one thing you need to know while you're doing the Everest Base Camp trek, which is pressure breathing. So enjoy. So the trek to Everest Base Camp now is pretty different than when you did it in the 90s. Like the whole time we went in 2022, there were tea houses with showers and toilets and good food, basically the whole route. How was it back in the day?
When I went in 1991, there were very few tourists or trekkers. The trails were not crowded at all. You could hike for an hour and not see anybody. And I mean, there's just a lot more people on the trail. When I was there last year going into base camp, I was kind of bummed out at how many people I saw. There were a few thousand people on the trail going into base camp on the particular day that I was hiking, and it was just wall to wall people. And there's a lot more tea houses and places to stop and get lunches and things like that. I mean, there's basically on the way into base camp, every village now is kind of built out, especially like Namche Bazaar. If you look at pictures from the 1970s to today, it's basically doubled in size. It's crazy, the growth. But there's just a lot more people from all over the world going to Nepal to look at Everest in the Himalayas. And even though it's crowded, it's still a wonderful trip. The views are spectacular, and the people of Nepal are just wonderful people. So I would highly recommend it to anybody to do that trip.
Can you talk about, because didn't you camp
Um,
on?
yep, in '91, we camped, and also in the late '90s when I took treks into Nepal or to Khumbu, we'd sleep in tents every night. And in '91, when we went into Everest Base Camp, we slept in tents most of the nights. Some nights we'd sleep in tea houses, but we always had tents. We had a lot of porters and we had a lot of yaks carrying a lot of our gear. And We flew into Lukla, and then we'd meet all these porters and they carry all our gear in. Nowadays, some of the Everest expeditions will fly their gear above Namche, and then they'll have porters or yaks pick the gear up from there. But we'd camp out most of the time, and we'd have a tent for eating in. We'd have local Sherpa cooks. You know, they cook dalbit um, and boil potatoes and things like that, and fry eggs. We'd also eat outside a lot if the weather was nice. But now you're in tea houses almost on every trek, and you eat inside all the meals.
Things that people forget to bring on the trek. One, I'd bring some Tabasco sauce. It helps with the food because the food in Nepal can be pretty bland, and having some Tabasco sauce on the trek up to base camp is wonderful. I'd also recommend bringing some really high quality Instamatic coffee, like the Starbucks packets and things like that. Coffee in Nepal is fair. You can get some really nice black coffee and lattes and things like that at Namche Bazaar and at Lukla and in Kathmandu. But if you want really good coffee, you need to bring it. So those are my two big recommendations food-wise. Equipment-wise, a nice sun hat, and you want to make sure You have a couple different pairs of shoes, some lightweight running shoes for walking around towns and villages when your day's off. I also bring some Birkenstocks that I can put on at night when I have to walk down the hallway to go to the bathroom. And then I also have really nice fitting, like Hoka hiking shoes for the day, the trek that you need throughout the day. I would, if you're looking for a guide company in Nepal, I would do your research. One of my favorite guide companies in Nepal is called Wangchu Peak Promotions. It's owned by Lakpa Sherpa, the daughter of the great Wangchu Sherpa, who's a famous climbing Sherpa in Nepal. Very trustworthy. They have great Sherpa guides. They'll take care of you, and they have good food, good porters. They stay at the greatest lodges up there. That's who I would use.
What are the first signs of altitude sickness, and like when should someone turn around or stop climbing?
Very fit people, I've seen fit triathletes show up on Denali and get horrible altitude sickness. So fitness and altitude acclimation, I don't really think there's a big correlation. But the key is, like I said, acclimation is hydration, pacing yourself, maybe taking the Diamox, and what you see with people that don't acclimate well is maybe a severe headache, nausea, vomiting. You get this thing called acute mountain sickness first. AMS is what we call it. And it's your body feels kind of hungover. And if you don't slow down and acclimate and maybe take a rest day at a lower elevation, and you keep going up when you're feeling like that, that can turn into what we call pulmonary edema or cerebral edema. Pulmonary edema is when your lungs fill up with liquid and you basically slowly drown in your own liquid. Or you get cerebral edema, where your brain starts to swell up. And it's really critical if you're feeling like crap at a tea house, like let's say you're at Namche Bazaar at 10,500 feet on the way up to base camp. You've been there for a day or two, but you feel like crap. I'd recommend taking another rest day to allow your body to acclimate. And I think it would make all the difference in the world. Basically, altitude sickness feels like a severe hangover.
Yeah. And you said this was about Everest, but you said in an earlier video that it takes guts to turn around. And I think the same thing goes with base camp. And so many people don't do that.
Yeah.
And then they get in trouble.
Yeah.
I think this is the number one thing you need to know before trekking to Everest Base Camp. And the only reason I know about it is because of my dad, and it's rarely talked about. And that is pressurized breathing. So can you explain pressurized breathing, what it is, how to do it, and why it helps?
Yeah. So I call it pressure breathing, and I learned it the first time I climbed Mount Rainier in 1979. The higher you go in the atmosphere, there's less barometric air pressure. So you want to compensate for that. And as you go up in elevation, like on, let's say, Mount Rainier, you're at Camp Muir on Mount Rainier at 10,000 feet. You're starting to feel, maybe you get a headache and lightheaded, and you feel a little weak. And the way to compensate for the lack of air or barometric air pressure is this breathing technique called pressure breathing. And you inhale normally, but exhale. You get all that dead air out of your lungs. And let's pretend you got a candle right here. You pucker your lips, inhale normally, but exhale with a forced breath. It's not nothing like that. It's just pretend you're going to blow a candle right here. And so you inhale normal and breathing all that all that dead air out of your lungs. You might do that every 5 to 10 steps, but as you get higher in elevation, you do it more often. And when you're near the summit of Mount Rainier, for instance, you might be doing it every step. And when you do that, you get all that air out and you breathe in normally. And it kind of helps, it creates a low pressure system in your lungs and gets all that air out. The other thing that is important is pacing yourself when you're hiking to Everest Base Camp or Rainier or Denali. It's easier to go at a nice, steady pace than a fast pace and then stop and rest. It's like a car. When your car stops and starts all the time, you get bad gas mileage. But when you're climbing or hiking and you're pacing yourself and keeping your heart rate at a manageable level, you're conserving energy. So you're hiking, you're breathing, and it's all in a rhythm and a nice pace, and that's key.
I felt like we had an advantage from knowing that.
Yeah, made a big difference when we were there in 2022.
Yeah.
You can, anybody that's, in good shape, fit, can climb Rainier, can climb to Everest Base Camp. If you use this technique, it really simplifies everything, and it gives you a better shot at getting to Everest Base Camp feeling halfway decent.
And everyone on our team made it
Yeah.
fine, pretty much.
Yep. Everybody did it, and everybody did the breathing. It takes time to learn. If at first it feels kind of uncomfortable, you might feel like you're making a fool out of yourself, but man, it works. And all the good climbers do it.